Thank you, Julia. I am very happy to be in this space, seeing people dancing online. So I'm already very encouraged by the group that I'm with right now. And thank you for that really generous introduction, Julia. Really, what I'm going to try and do in the next half hour or so is share with you all my journey as to how I ended up here and all the bumps and stops, and really share with you how what I do now is a fusion of my interest in winning hearts and minds, which is my narratives work, and what I found out was missing in the work that what I was doing, uh, and the opportunities that are there. If only we open ourselves up to new muscles that we can practice in the work that we do. So I am hoping to not bore you, given that this is a happy dancing group. So I'm going to share my screen now uh, and take you through my journey. So, leapfrogging to the future of social change work. Julia said that I'm going to talk about futures thinking or foresight. When I go around my circle of activists and social change practitioners, the first reaction that I get when I tell them that I work on this thing called foresight or futures thinking is that, but Kriz, you can't predict the future. How do you expect me to think 10 or 20 or 30 years out when I don't even know what Erdogan will do in Turkey tomorrow? How can I predict the future? Are you encouraging me to do that? And my answer is no, because contrary to what the term might suggest, futures thinking is not about predicting the future. What it is about is thinking about different probable futures and then working backwards from there so we can be ready regardless of what futures come, what future or combination of futures come to pass. So it's like looking at different options of the future and then looking at the common strategic themes and demands that they entail so that we can change not in the future, but today. This to me is a definition of resilience, right? So foresight then is an exciting thing. It's not about having a crystal ball, but it's about exercising new muscles. And to me, I think every person walks around in life with a pair of sunglasses, where when we get trained in something, we basically have that as the sunglasses that we wear and through which we see reality. I was working in Colombia for a good number of years, and one of my good friends from there, who's a feminist Colombian, she told me one day, you know what, Kriz, feminism to me is like suddenly gaining a pair of red sunglasses. Since I became a feminist, I saw everything through the lens of my red feminist sunglasses. So my question to you is, what is your sunglasses? What color is it? And futures thinking to me is about gaining a new pair of sunglasses in addition to the ones I already have. It could be, blue sunglasses, fuchsia, green, neon blue, neon green, whatever color you have it. But it's really about being curious to try on different pairs of sunglasses to see the reality we've always worked in. What I'm going to do now is share with you my 3 favorite sunglasses from Futures Thinking, and hopefully at the end we can practice these new sunglasses for a bit. So the first pair of sunglasses in Futures Thinking is moving from siloed thinking or thinking in compartments to a way of thinking that is interconnected. So in Foresight, we have this thing called STEEP, or STEEP, which stand for the different areas that we are required to look at when we think about our strategies, our work, and our future. And that means, as opposed to focusing only on political events. And I find that most, social change practitioners are really in tune with what's happening in politics or maybe in society. It's asking us to also pay attention to what's happening in technology, in the environment, and economics, and then not treat them as separate areas of reality, but see how they interact with one another. We know that what happens, say, in pop culture can really alter the way that we do things in politics, or something that happens in a garage somewhere in Mumbai can really alter the life of someone in a community in Rwanda. It might sound not real, but we know that that's how reality functions. So we should treat the world and our strategies in such interconnected way. The second pair of sunglasses in Foresight is being able to detect what's happening in the mainstream. And this is what we call trends. So imagine opening your newspaper, or if you don't have paper newspapers anymore, your app. These are the things that are on the front page. They're the headlines. And I find that we are pretty good at knowing what's in the mainstream or what are the trends, closing civic space, the rise of populists. But this relates now to the third pair of sunglasses that I find I didn't have before, and that I find many social change practitioners struggle with, which is to go from understanding and knowing what's in the mainstream to also being able to dig deeper as to what lies underneath these trends. And we call that in futures thinking as deep drivers of change. Deep drivers of change are things that are bigger, larger, more long lasting than trends. Trends are like, fashion trends. They come and go. We have populists right now, but we don't know if we'll still be dealing with populists in the next 10, 20 years. They might mutate into some other form. But what underlies the phenomenon of populism is something that has been going on for decades before that, and we can be sure that it will continue even after populists say goodbye to us. And these deep drivers of change, I will explain them further by distinguishing them with two other things, which is first, events, second, the trends, and third, the deep drivers of change. And I will use the analogy of the tree. So an event is like an individual tree. It's like your news item in the newspaper. Let's say one event that happened years ago was Viktor Orban gets elected to power in Hungary. That's one event. And then in the forest, there are similar trees, or in a newspaper, as we read every day, there are similar events that we find. That's Orban in Hungary, Bolsonaro being elected in Brazil, Johnson in the UK, Modi in India, Duterte in the Philippines, and thank God he's not there anymore, not officially, Trump in the US. And when you bring together these similar trees or events, they form a forest. That forest is what we call the trend. And the trend that we see here of all these elections is the rise of populists in mainstream politics or in formal democracies. Now, often I find that practitioners, including myself, would stop there. And we base our strategies on these trends. But it's also important for us to look at the deep drivers of change that is there beneath the forest. It's like this in earth science, if you remember your earth science, the tectonic plates in the world that move the surface of the earth. It's there, it's powerful, it moves so slowly, but it's there, but we don't notice it. And if we're looking at the trend of the rise of populists in mainstream politics, one of the deep drivers of change of that produced that could be the decline in trust by the public in formal institutions such as government or traditional politics. So people are getting sick of the elitism of government or traditional politicians. That's why they're turning to supposedly non-traditional personalities that promise to break free from decades of how politics has been done. And we know that this decline in institutional trust by the public has been going on for decades, and it will continue for years to come, even after all these populists leave office. That means that when we think about our strategy, we have to not stop with the trends. We have to dig deeper about deep drivers of change for us and our organizations to be truly future fit. The third muscle in Foresight is something that Julia sent to you last night for the assignment. So we went from looking at the front page of the newspaper, what's behind the front page, to now what lies in the margins. These are what we call signals of change. So signals of change are phenomena that is happening in the fringes, in the peripheries. It's not yet mainstream. It is still small or localized. So you don't see it often or in a mass scale, but if it scales or becomes mainstream, it will fundamentally alter reality. So, using the newspaper analogy, it's like that article in the bottom right corner of page 14 of your newspaper that most people, including yourself, often just gloss over or never even realize is there. It's something that you heard from before that people are not paying attention to yet. But if it becomes a trend, it will alter reality and various aspects of it as we know it. An example would be in Singapore, and I saw that there's also one in Israel, the first commercial lab meat production facility has just become operational. You know, meat is usually from animals out there in the field or in a cage, but now there's a facility in Singapore and in Israel that can produce meat that's coming from a lab. So no animal is actually killed for that. Can you imagine if that small event in Singapore and in Israel becomes mainstream in all countries in the world? What does that mean for climate? What does that mean for consumption? What does that mean for agribusiness and the entire supply chain around that? What does that mean for humanity and consumerism? It could be fundamental, but it's not yet mainstream. But if we really want to be ahead of the curve and plan for the future, we should think about that possible future today. So those are the three pairs of sunglasses. I'd like to now test out those three pairs of sunglasses with you, if you're fine with that, and to something that apparently is very relevant to what was just presented right before the session, which is on winning hearts and minds, which I find, based on my narrative's work, is a critical skill in social change. What is the future of winning hearts and minds? What is the future of communications? I'm going to share with you some findings by the Institute for the Future, which did a study on the future of media back in 2016. According to the Institute for the Future, there are three eras with respect to human communications or media. The first era is what we call the era of mass media. That was when the television came to life and suddenly information became available to millions of people. And the transistor radio. All of a sudden, media became massified, hence mass media. We have now transitioned to the era that we are in now, which is the era of social media. Now it's not just a few newscasters and just the TV and the radio that is the source of information. Now billions of people are newscasters, opinion makers, and authors, and we exchange information without the same barriers, formal barriers as before. We have gleaned into the lives of billions of people because of the era and the capabilities we are in now. And we think it's gone crazy, right? Well, according to the Institute for the Future, we have been entering the era that they call the era of ambient media. Ambient from the word, ambient means it surrounds us, it's everywhere. The difference with the era of social media is that if you want to get information or share information or opinion, you still have to get your cell phone, your computer, a screen that is your interface to the outside world or to communication or information. Ambient media means that you don't even need a screen, and that information can come from and be transmitted to different sources and devices and even living things beyond your smartphone and your computer. I'll give you some aspects of that. Here is what we call IoT or Internet of Things. This is not mainstream yet, but the technology has been there and it will only become mainstream. Internet of Things basically means that your refrigerator, your washing machine, your dishwasher, if you have one, anything that can be plugged to a power socket can have a chip and artificial intelligence that can record information, transmit information, maybe to a cloud, and exchange information with each other. So at some point, your refrigerator will actually be able to record how much milk is still in your refrigerator if you're out of milk, and maybe tell you about it so you can buy it, or you can connect it directly to your Amazon account so it can order it for the next grocery round. It might sound crazy, but the technology is there. It's just a matter of when it will get massified. And of course, our questions are about the amount of data that's being collected, the sovereignty we have about that data, et cetera, et cetera. But that technology is there. So from cell phones to computers to appliances and anything electronic. It's not just also about the things that we're used to using around the house. It can also be about new things we haven't been using a lot of, but are there. And when you put them on, it gives you a whole new way of communicating. And that is what we call the AR/VR goggles, or augmented reality, virtual reality goggles that we see a lot of actually. I'm going to show to you a video from Microsoft when they launched in March of this year their new product called Microsoft Mesh. We saw a few weeks ago how Facebook renamed its mother company to Meta, because they're now focusing on the next stage of humanity, which is virtual reality. And you enable virtual reality, you enable being able to connect to other people and get information and share information through things like those goggles. Here is the launch video of Microsoft Mesh.
Connection is a spark that gives our lives meaning. It drives us to seek out others who feel the same way.
Okay, why don't you input the data and we'll take a look together. Hey, Mari, what you got for me?
To find those who share our views, yet offer different perspectives.
So this next. We're here.
Challenge us with new ways of seeing. Deepen our understanding. And enrich our lives.
最后一笔的时候，获钱。
Great things happen when we commit to something bigger than ourselves.
Take a closer look at it.
Place this here. Let's see how we go from there, okay?
This sense of collaboration and the feelings of connection it brings excites us.
Hey, just in time. I'm gonna move it slightly, okay?
It's yours, take it.
We have 2 planes right now on the same trajectory.
As we put people first, technology fades into the background and feels like anything but.
Aisha, what do you think?
I think we had 330, maintaining 2800. We'll be clear for approach.
Excellent.
This changes the way we see the world, and in turn, changes the world we see.
These numbers are looking great, actually.
There's promise in the possibilities, and what we see and create next will stretch the imagination.
Good morning, Sarah.
Morning.
Slowly coming towards the hub.
A world without boundaries.
Good job. A lot better than yesterday.
Yeah.
Excellent. Slowly bring
A
your...
world where technology enhances, not limits, humanity. With people front, center, and in the spotlight. The future is here. And here can be anywhere. Introducing Microsoft Mesh.
So we think that it's now so cool that we can work together virtually through Zoom, right? Well, the future is that we won't just be able to see each other on screens. We can actually sit next to our colleagues in a collaborative environment through augmented reality and virtual reality. Or can you imagine being able to be with your child as you're away for work or other things? This future, this technology is already there. It's just a question of when it will be massified. So, ambient media, not just phones, not just computers, but also our appliances, these new devices. But also, it won't just be devices or non-living things. It will also be our bodies. Let me get to the next slide. So In 2018, so this is old news, thousands of people in Sweden started inserting microchips under their skin. The microchips would contain basic information, the contact details of the person, social media profile, credit card details, and lock credentials for people to be able to open their offices, their homes, enter train stations where they contain their tickets, and also enter concerts. It's this tiny chip that is giving convenience to people who choose to have it. So they're using their body, or what we call body hacking, to be able to transmit information, but also receive information, right? So the human body is becoming a transmitter or an enabler of communication as well. This electronic duo in Canada in 2015, so that's 6 years ago, in one of their concerts, asked a number of their fans to put on heart rate monitors so that after the concert, they could see when the heartbeats of these people actually jumped or plateaued or changed given what set of music or songs they played. The purpose is to be able to really tailor their next performances based on the biomarkers of people, not just what people say, but what the bodies of these individuals say. So we're seeing an environment that is rich in information being given, being shared, not just through non-living things, but also the human body. It is like entering a kaleidoscope of information. We think, especially communicators, people here who are in the communications team and who are communicators, we think that we're in what we call an attention economy, right? It's so hard to compete for people's attention. Well, wait until we get deep into this ambient media world. How do we catch people's attention, and how do we win hearts and minds in an information saturated world? So we will go from this to this. And to really fully, maybe more vividly describe this to you, I'm going to share a short clip from a movie called Hyperreality. This scene is a woman in a bus in Medellin, which is a city in Colombia, who's having a life crisis about her identity. Note where information is being transmitted and shared, and how fast, and how things are coming at different layers and not necessarily through objects that she can touch.
Bastante. Apúrate si quieres una buena calificación.
Voy lo más rápido que puedo.
¿Has pensado en correr? Es saludable y eficiente.
Seguro que no hay más trabajos disponibles. Estudio para ser profesora y estoy haciendo mercados.
Y además puedes quedarte con los puntos de fidelización. Eres una noche afortunada. Tienes que confiar en la aplicación. ¿Te sientes inspirada? Gracias. Chao.
¿Quién soy yo? No, eso no es lo que quiero decir. ¿Para dónde voy? No. Puedo volver a empezar. Olvídalo.
Estoy presente ahora. Me amo. Estoy libre de mi ira. Estoy libre de mi tristeza. Y amo a mis vidas.
Olá, me llamo Maria.
It might seem like watching a sci-fi movie, but like I said, these technologies and these potentials are not hypothetical. They're already there. The question for us is, are we going to not just adjust, but really put our ears on the ground and see what of these things we actually think are favorable to the causes we're working on, which of these are tools that we can utilize to the maximum for the work that we're doing. And so when this ambient media fully materializes, we're not catching up, but we're actually ahead of the curve. How can we see the opportunities here, but also minimize what we see are threats and risks to our way of life or the way of life that we want? So before I overwhelm you with more seemingly, people say it's scary, right? The more important thing here is answering the question of, all right, what does all of this mean for my work? I'll share with you three things that I think could be useful to think about. The first one is there's that possibility soon of being able to do hyper targeting at an immediate, very individualized level for communicators or even for decision makers. You do focus group discussions or you base your decisions on the characteristics or profiles of your target audience or the communities you're working with. Right now, the way we try to understand people is through their demographic characteristics. Where are they located? What's their gender, or what are their genders, their age, etc., etc. But we will be able to, information will be available way beyond demographic characteristics to real-time live emotional states and the capability, just as it is for marketers, to be able to curate and change content and the ability to catch people's attention live as well. That's first. The second one is we will move from being able to win hearts and minds using words and images to having to create and curate full sensory immersive experiences for people. We think now that we've been able to get on the bandwagon of getting the skills to choose the right words, like being wordsmiths, or the perfect images for a social media posts. But in the future, it won't just be limited to these 2D experiences. They will be completely 3 or 5D. And what does that mean for the capabilities of our staff? Not just the comms person or the comms team that you have, but for the entire organization. When things will no longer be limited to words, people will need to feel and hear and smell and touch experiences and ideas. How do we get those skills within our groups and our organizations? And finally, there's this huge potential for building broad-based empathy and intimacy in this future. That might seem counterintuitive to many of you. You think, oh, what an impersonal world it will be, right? We will be further divided or siloed. And that is a very, very real possibility. But at the same time, the Institute for the Future said that in the social media world, we've been able to glean into the lives of millions of people, but it's still quite limited because we base it on what they say or the words and images and videos that we see. But in that future reality, we will be able to immerse people, to be able to live with a community of indigenous people somewhere so far away through the capabilities of this ambient media. There is that opportunity, which means that the muscles that we should start exercising really are as follows. The first one is we need to be able to integrate basic neuroscience insights in our work. And I've done a bit of digging, and I know that a lot of you are already using this or doing this or thinking about it. The intersection between neuroscience and peace and conflict, how it affects the human brain, the human psychology. Now, more broadly, how can we use neuroscience to inform our strategic decisions, our communication strategies? Because at the end of the day, we are communicating and trying to reach humans. But we see what NGO actually sits down and asks, how is this neuroscience based? But I think we should ask those questions and start asking those questions. The second one is we can't have all these skills in one person or in one team, which means we will need to collaborate with people with very different skills that we don't have. If you look around your team and you see people who are very similar to you, meaning you went to the same school, you have the same degrees, have the same background, then I think we have to start asking questions of how can we be more hyper collaborative and how can we work with people who are so different from us? And finally, there's this thing that we do in the world. Well, we think we do it, they do it in the corporate world, but we actually do it also in civil society, which is called benchmarking. Simply defined, benchmarking is when we try to test or evaluate our work, our practices based on the best practices of the leader in our field. The problem with benchmarking, according to futurist Daniel Burrus, is that if we do this, by the time you spend so many years trying to adopt that new best practice, you would have already spent years and resources to adjust to something which by that time is already passé. It's no longer the next innovative thing. So you ended up basically wasting your resources and your energy. What we should instead do, according to him, is to do future benchmarking, where you try to anticipate the best practice of the leader in your field in the future, not today, and get it done in your organization today. So the thinking that we've always had is if something works, then continue doing it. If it ain't broke, don't fix it, right? That's many organizations have been working based on the same theory of change for 4 decades. If it's still working, if we can still get funds for it, then we should keep doing it. But according to Daniel Burrus, using this idea of future benchmarking, the saying should instead be, if it works, it's already obsolete. The next new innovation is already afoot, and our charge is to find that and really challenge ourselves to start doing that today. So it's like preventing ourselves from, you have this beautiful, delicious dish, and it's so delicious that you end up, taking more and more of it from the pan, that you end up ruining the bottom of the pan because there's just no more to get. What we want instead is to maybe imagine new dishes. Can we think of new, delicious, good smelling recipes that we can cook in the kitchen for the people we care about and the people we work for? Because at the end of the day, for me, and I will end with this, futures thinking is not about adjusting, adapting, but it's really about that sense of agency, that it's not just something that we have to wait for. It's something that we can make. And that's why I requested you to think about signals of change, not only so you can think ahead of everyone else, but also think, what do I like of these signals of change and what can I actively scale today? Because I can make the future. I don't really need to predict it. So this pandemic has shown us that, it's too late to catch up. But right now, it's a terrific time to leapfrog. So thank you for your time, and I hope to have further discussion with you. And if you want to start practicing this, there's a guide that is free with activities for people who have no training whatsoever in Foresight. And my hope is that Foresight can really be democratized and practiced by anyone and everyone in the social change field. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Krizna. And I just asked Paula if she could pin me to the stage. So we could have just a brief conversation, and then we were going to go into small groups to actually go through the signals of change. So a couple of things, Krizna, that I would love to get your initial reactions to, because there's been some messaging flying around as you're talking. One is, can you address, one thing is, what if what you're presenting with these future trends feels like something that we don't want and that feels ominous, and that we're worried about, Facebook becoming Meta, and that actually is their activism that we feel like, well, wait a minute, this is a direction that is it already here, or can we prevent it? That's one thing. But the second thing is, if you could even give some examples, because we have countries who are represented here that are struggling even with electricity.
Yeah.
So, right. So, or who can't see themselves in a refrigerator sending milk. But I know that you have examples of foresight and future thinking, even for the countries that aren't thinking about, these big technology changes, but other changes and how they're going to sense trends and or signals of change in their context. That would be 2 questions that it would be helpful for you to answer. And then maybe we can talk, we can go into groups to even, if you could set up the signals of change exercise.
Yeah, thanks, Julia. Well, your first question is actually the question I constantly encourage everyone to think about. I ended with that note about having agency about the future because the future is not here yet. It's not set. We can change it. We can, like what I said, we don't just need to prepare for it. If there are things, signals that are already there that we don't want, or we know they're going to happen, but they can get messy, or if they become mainstream, they can really, they can really go out of control, then why should we not start talking about first preventing them or putting up regulatory frameworks already today so that in the future we're not talking about, but we don't have laws about augmented reality. The same way, with this era of social change, our social media, people are saying, well, our laws are not really fit to be able to regulate these big companies. We have the opportunity today, especially for an organization or the network of organizations like Partners Global, which is present everywhere, to really actively think about these precursors of change, determine which changes you like, which changes you don't like, and act accordingly, not in the future, but today. For example, this idea of killer robots in the humanitarian field, right? There has been work going on at the international level to preemptively ban killer robots before they even become legal. And that is the kind of work that we need to start asking, what are the precursors of change we're seeing now? And how can we preemptively ban, regulate, stop, or scale things based on how they contribute to our theory of change? The second one, I come from the Philippines, right? If I talk to my parents about IoT, they'll be like, what are you talking about, right? Like what you said, for many people, for most of the people in the world, internet access, electricity, clean water are even basics that you can't even think about. And to me, futures thinking is not so much about focusing on the different technologies, but the underlying phenomenon and the possibilities that they represent. What do I mean by that? IoT, or Internet of Things, means that a lot of people will be saying yes without them wanting to say yes to more and more information being recorded about the way they live. And I think that phenomenon will be true regardless of whether that's represented with the presence of an IoT-enabled device in your home, or just the fact that you don't even have electricity in your home, but there's still a lot of information being gathered of you through other means, whether by government or other actors in society. So even if people don't have the same access to internet today, the same phenomenon of exchange of information or being able to denounce violations of human rights through simple video in a very crappy phone, these are things that we see everywhere, even in countries that are very poor. So I think the critical question that we should ask is, instead of AR, VR as a technology, what is the phenomenon or the direction of humanity, how we handle information, how we willingly give information that it represents, and what does that mean for everyone, regardless of people's access to these different types of technology? We do know that technology is unequal, right? Technology is not, it's not a neutral thing. The way technology is felt, accessed, and experienced is replicated by the different kinds of inequality we see in the world. That will not go away, but it represents deeper things. You're unmute.
Yeah, so thank you for that clarification. I think it's helpful, and I'm sure that everyone is just have their minds exploding right now and would love to be able to chat with each other about what you have presented and the specific exercise. So we were going to break up into groups of 4.